Welcome to Feminist Founders, a podcast that explores how to create a more equitable world through entrepreneurship. I'm your host, coach and journalist Becky Mollenkamp. Feminist Founders is a listener-funded podcast. Your contributions enable me to continue bringing you these important conversations without corporate advertising. To support the mission, head to feministfounderspodcast.com and sign up for a paid subscription. The link is in the show notes. Now, on to today's show. We're nearing the end of season 1, and I'm sad, but I'm also happy because today I get to introduce you to the incredible women who are running Sesh Coworking in Houston, Texas. We talked about making community and spaces that you are creating more welcoming for everyone and all of the issues that can go into that, especially if you're someone who holds a oppressor identity or multiple of those identities. And how do you create spaces that are more welcoming for folks who have marginalized identities? I loved our conversation. These women are doing amazing work in a state that is challenging our thoughts around equity. Sesh Coworking provides women and genderqueer people with a workspace that nurtures professional and personal growth, supports their natural lifestyle and working habits, and fosters community through collaboration, learning, and advocacy. I'm speaking in this episode with the co-founders of Sesh Coworking, Meredith Wheeler and Maggie Segrich, and I think you're going to love them and this chat. But before we get into it, for one more time, will you please take a moment to listen and learn about another great podcast?
Hey, it's Jordan, the Radical Joy Coach, and I've got one question for you. Are you ready to rest? If you just screamed an enthusiastic yes, join me at the Just Joy with Jordan, the podcast that helps bleeding heart founders learn how to rest. If you've ever wondered, why is it so hard for you to rest? Or why do you feel guilty when you do? Or why are you so good at helping everyone else but yourself? This is for you. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Thank you for your ongoing support. Let's get into this wonderful conversation again with Maggie and Meredith of Sesh Coworking. Hello, thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you for having us. We're excited.
Good. Let's start out by having each of you tell me about your individual relationship with the word feminist.
I think the first thing that comes to mind when I hear the word feminist is power. It's the power we deserve, the power, like our right to power. I think, feminist is this radical idea that women are humans too. I actually have a t-shirt from my grandmother. It's this little white t-shirt and it says those words in red and it's all holy and beat up. She wore it so much. And when she passed away and my parents were cleaning out her house and her closet, they found that and they said, of all the grandchildren, this is going to Meredith and it's hanging in my closet. So that's my very nostalgic tie to the word, but also what it makes me feel. For me, I think feminist means knowledge. I feel like as I got older, I grew into becoming a feminist. Having grown up in the Midwest, it was always kind of painted as an ugly portrait of an angry woman. And I was like, oh, that's not me. And then in college, post-college, becoming an entrepreneur, I kind of learned along the way what it is to be a feminist and how it kind of changes as you change, right? As you grow older or more mature and have wisdom. The other thing that I'd like to add, and I know this is something that Maggie and I have talked so much about and something we try to bring into Sesh, is how intersectional feminism truly is. And I think, like you said, Mags, when I was younger, I thought it was just about women. But we realize now that the idea of feminism goes so much further beyond women and it really affects us all.
All right, so let's talk about workspaces, because you have founded Sesh as a place that's really meant to be very inclusive. And a lot of the words that you've used are about safety and creating spaces that feel safety for all sorts of folks. And that brings up the questions immediately for me about what made you think of that? Like, what are your experiences, perhaps personally, or that you have talked with others about around workspaces, whether it's shared workspaces like a co-working space or in a traditional work environment, but that have not felt safe and inclusive?
So when we initially developed Sesh, we came at it from our perspectives and our experiences as women, as white women. And we felt very empowered at first in that. But after we opened the doors to our first location in February of 2020, epic timing, I think we all remember 2020 for the pandemic, and then also the push of we're all reckoning with something that Black Americans are dealing with every day, and people of color in America are dealing with every day. And that I speak of, George Floyd's murder, but also the murder of countless other Black Americans at the hands of police and on. And I think Maggie and I kind of sat down once we got back in the space in June. We decided to reopen because she and I needed it for our mental health. And we looked at ourselves and we could say, are we unintentionally creating exclusivity to our space and to what we want to offer by not broadening our outreach and not broadening who our space is meant to be for? Because initially the idea was, female focused, because we wanted to provide women specifically a space where they could show up as themselves, feel seen, feel heard, and be inspired to be in an environment around other women who are appreciative of the same thing. So I think, to your point, like, we realized in that that's not just something women need. It's something every human needs and deserves. And so that was kind of our pivot, right? It was a bit of a reckoning too, and saying like, okay, we want to be there for Houstonians, for all Houstonians, and we want to, number one, acknowledge all the each individual experiences that each individual has, which is so unique and so nuanced. And we want them to come into this space and know that we see you, we hear you, we respect you, and you're safe here. You're safe here to do your job and be the best human that you want to be.
What are some of the barriers that people experience that keeps them from that sort of feeling that you guys have heard, either that you've experienced, and obviously that's through your lens as white women, and then also that you've heard now from your clientele? What are the barriers that they've experienced in workspaces, in shared workspaces, that have kept them from feeling seen, valued, heard, safe?
I have two off of the top of my head that I would like to share. I think the one is a theme that we hear over and over again. It's not from one particular client. It's that when they do walk into other spaces, whether it be a community space, a workspace, a corporate environment, that there's no one there that looks like them. And then I think that creates a barrier, right? Well, if there's no one here that's like me, then do I belong here? And then it becomes well, maybe I should just not be here, And then I think the second one that I know really, it made me emotional, but also like proud, was last year during Pride, our community manager, Dane, made a post on LinkedIn and shared how he felt proud, because it was Pride Month, to be able to work in a place that allows him to show up as his whole self. Dane is trans, and the trans community specifically, while at home and in their private lives, they can show up as 100% themselves and talk about their relationships and talk about their health care and the things that they're going through. They cannot do that in a lot of work environments. And for Dane, having his whole life, the work life and the home life, to be able to show up as Dane, he just felt really grateful and appreciative. And it was until he shared that and I read it on LinkedIn, I hadn't ever thought about that. And now it's become even more apparent now as the last year has gone on, that more workplaces and just spaces in general need to be open and accepting to the differences.
I think it's really about, too, being able to show up as a whole person, so this is one small thing that I felt, and then I'll give an example of how that relates to other people's experiences as well. So as a working mother, there's always a little bit of feeling, how much do I acknowledge motherhood when I'm in the workplace? How much do I talk about my children and the responsibilities I have? When can I step away because I have to run one of my kids to a doctor's appointment? And so there's that feeling that you have to hide this super big, important, wonderful part of yourself at work. And an example that one of our members, this came from Tammy Wallace. She's the CEO, founder, and president of the Greater Houston LGBT Chamber of Commerce, whom we are members of. We work very, very closely with them. They actually office here at Sesh with us. And she was once speaking about Sesh and said that in the workplace, in other workplaces, oftentimes there's that, as a gay person, you have that struggle of, okay, how do I introduce my wife or my husband? Should I say partner? Can I say husband or wife? Is that going to make the other person feel uncomfortable? Is that going to be something that's going to become something bigger than what it is? And she said at Sesh, you just say wife. You just say husband. Because there's this trust that whoever you're talking to, like, great, it's cool. I'm so excited to meet her. I'm so excited to meet him. And nobody should have to walk through life hiding such big, wonderful parts of themselves, hiding the people that they love the most.
The things that bring them joy.
Yeah. You should be able to show up as a whole person. Another example of this, and you can edit this all out if I'm talking way too long, but we had, at one of our events we had last month, we were speaking, I don't even remember what the conversation was about.
Which one?
Leaders Who Lunch.
Challenges that people face in their community.
And it was we keep our events intimate so that we can have great conversations, but it was a still sizable group. It was probably like 25, 26 people. And at one of the tables, someone stood up and shared and started crying about how something that her community was facing, and she as a Black woman felt triggered when it was being asked because, again, of another, sadly, a recent murder of a Black woman in Florida. And she felt safe enough to let those emotions flow. And she stood up actually to share how open and loving and supportive her table mates were being in that moment and how grateful she was for that. The whole world should feel like that for everybody. And until it does, Sesh we'll keep fighting.
Plug it along.
You talked about trust, and I think safety and those things go hand in hand. And I want to talk a little bit about the ways that you're fostering that beyond just the amenities or things that you're offering. But first, you also mentioned about being a mother. And I know that you have, like, children are allowed inside of this co-working space, and there's an area. I know obviously you also have people working, so you have to think about noise, but children can be there. There are toys and books and things and snacks for the kids. The kids need to be in a certain area and supervised, but they're in, and that is not a common experience for a lot of moms when they're working, unless they're at home. Tell me a little bit about that decision, how that goes over inside of the community.
I don't know about Meredith, but when For me, when I was a jewelry designer and I lived in New York, my studio was in my home. So my daughter was just always there, and clients would come in and she would be there. And then when we kind of started talking about a brick and mortar location, it was for us, because our kids are actually the same age, it was kind of like, well, yeah, duh, they're going to be there all the time and they're going to be playing and being friends. And so, of course, we're just going to have stuff there. And then the pandemic happened. And then the lines for parents all over the world just got really blurry and messy, because all of a sudden now, not only are you working from home, you're schooling from home, and it was messy, right? And so I think for us and for our community, having that space to just show up and be like, yep, sometimes life is messy and you don't have any childcare, so your kid just has to come with you. I think they appreciate it.
I think at the end of the day, Sesh was not going to become Sesh if our kids weren't in tow, because it wasn't always possible.
My daughter's here right now.
Oh, she is? Where is she?
She's watering plants.
Oh, I didn't know she was here. Yeah, it wouldn't have happened if our kids couldn't have been in tow. When we first started Sesh in 2017, my second child was still a baby. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to bring her sometimes when we go look at spaces. And, the rest of the world can just accept that. I mean, for better or for worse. But what we also find is that a lot of our members really like the fact that Sesh is theirs. And so, yeah, you can bring your children when you need to. Absolutely. But most of our members are like, I'm going to try really hard not to have to do that, because this is a little piece just for me. And we appreciate that too.
I also heard in your hiring, it sounds that you're really thinking through and hiring about making sure that the folks that are working at Sesh are people that will help others feel seen and welcomed, and that they're not alone. What are the other ways beyond bringing the kids to work, maybe in hiring? What other things are you doing to try and combat some of those challenges that we've talked about around inclusivity in workspaces?
We're in Texas, right? The things going on in Texas are crazy right now. So one of the ways is that we share knowledge about what state legislators are doing. So what bills that they're submitting, what they're voting on. And then once these bills are passed, what does that mean for our community? How does that impact them as individuals? And how does that impact them as business owners? We do things like we show up at the Capitol with groups to speak to these legislatures. We call them. We write letters. We show up at, there's a mayoral race right now going on in Houston, which is a big deal. And we show up at the forums when they're talking, about our community.
So Maggie mentioned showing up. I think it's really, really important, and something that we philosophically believe in, that if you're going to say you support a community, you better show up where that community shows up.
We don't, we can't say, oh, yeah, we support them, but come to our space.
Yeah. You got to come here. No.
That's not how that works.
We are active in a lot of nonprofit events. We show up to other people's events all the time, whether that's myself and Maggie or our team, or even sometimes doing a little bit more if we can, if there's opportunity to set up a table or something. But you got to show up. You got to show up.
You have to put the work in.
Yeah. You can't just expect to talk big and then just have people be like, oh yeah. No, it's the action that counts.
For example, there was a business here in Houston recently that changed their logo to a rainbow logo. And I went through all of their social media platforms, and outside of changing their logo, I didn't see anything that represented them doing the work or making an effort to help the community that they're saying, they're helping by rainbow washing their logo. So I made a comment and I was like, we would love to partner with you on an event for Pride. Like, just hit us up and we will collaborate and we will do this. And there was no reply.
How do you work together and within this community to preserve that inclusive feeling? Because it's one thing to do, to offer the child having space for children and to hire to have it feel representative and to go out into the community, all these wonderful things you're doing. And it can be very easy for a community to have one bad experience or, one thing that threatens the safety to sort of destroy a lot of what you've worked on that culture that you've been creating. So what are the things that you're doing? Are there shared agreements, visible values? Like, what are the things that you're doing to preserve that safety that you're working so hard to create?
So I think one thing we do is we really focus on treating each of our members as an individual. No assumptions, of course, no stereotypes, but just treating that, making that rapport with that individual, building that individual relationship. Our community manager, Dane, and our marketing manager, Brittany, they're really good at interacting with all of our members. And Maggie and I do as well. There's some members that we've known for 3 or 4 or 5, probably 5 years. Mm-hmm. So that's step one, seeing the individual, recognizing the individual. We also have a list of community rules.
We call them house rules.
Mm-hmm. And because some people come into to the space and they're like, oh, I've never been in a co-working space. Can you tell me what I'm allowed to do and what I'm not allowed to do? Because I really want to be a good member. That's usually, where a lot of new folks will come in and we're like, here, start with the community rules.
And the community rules, they're simple sometimes, and sometimes they're very blatant. Like, one of them is that we don't tolerate any form of harassment. So whether that's verbal, in person or via social media. And we make sure that if that does occur, we speak to those individuals and let them know, not okay. Other ways that we protect the community is that we actually use technology to do that. So we have a very high-tech lock system on our space, and in a lot of our spaces that can only read it. It reads your phone, but like, we have to grant you access, and so you can't get in or out unless you have it on your phone. We make everybody sign in, and we have pictures of everyone, and people are like, but why do you need my picture? I'm just here for a meeting. And it's like, well, because one time we had a gas leak and we had to evacuate the building. And yeah, we had people's names, but we were like, oh my gosh, that's a day pass person. We don't actually remember what they look like. So now we need your picture so we can be like, check, that person left the building.
They are safe.
And that's a very simple way of keeping people safe, but it's an important way, especially when we are very vocal and public about having the LGBT chamber here and working with nonprofits, specifically supporting Black and brown trans folks. We're in Texas, y'all. People are loud and proud about everything here. Take it or leave it.
Have you had issues from outside of the community with the fact that you have been so vocal, and how have you dealt with those?
The chamber's gotten threats, right? And so that just kind of puts us on alert. And then for a while last year, we were the national campaign headquarters for Beto O'Rourke, who's running for governor against Greg Abbott. And they had a few people, and they were just like, hey, here's this individual's picture. If he happens to stumble in or you see him on the cameras, let us know. And we were actually, he did walk in. We were like, guys, he's here. And they had security on site, so they were able to escort the individual off the property. But
On a different note, we've also, our members have experienced issues before, whether with abusive partners or we've had issues with stalkers before. And so in those scenarios, we have, as much as our member was comfortable filling us in, we've taken the information on the person, the photos, we've shared that internally with our team to keep an eye out for those individuals. And in one case, we even helped our member contact the police, and the police came and spoke with her here at the building and took care of that issue for her. We remained vigilant on our end as well, keeping an eye out for that individual, because we have to take into account that we are serving, as much as I don't want to admit we're all a part of a vulnerable population, at the end of the day, we are.
And I think something that's also with our move from our previous location in Montrose to now in Midtown here in Houston, we are in the middle of all of the services that help the unhoused population. So a lot of times we have clients who are like, there's someone sleeping by the front door. Or yesterday, for example, a woman came in looking for painkillers. And, my work with the Midtown Board has provided us the resources that we can then share with those people as we have experiences with them, right? Because we all have to live in this community together as business owners, as residents, and the unhoused population, right? Because those services are here for them. And so, of course, they're going to stay in the neighborhood and as close to where those services are because they don't have transportation.
I hear a lot around allyship, or maybe even accomplishship. I don't know what it would be to be an accomplice, but being an ally, being an accomplice, right? How do you view that responsibility? And specifically as white women,
You have a big responsibility, but I don't really look at that as Maggie and I being in a unique position. Maybe we are, but I kind of just look at it as our human responsibility, right? We have a responsibility to our children to teach them what love is and what love looks like so that they can grow up and experience that for themselves. We have a responsibility to anyone who has a different experience from our own to listen and let them know that our ears are open whenever you need to talk. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just human, right? Just being a good human.
I'm curious about the work internally that you both might need to do to be able to hold space, right? Because there is a lot that as white women we can't experience, that we'll never fully understand. And to be, wanting to be that kind of person, that kind of ally who's able to say, we are creating an inclusive space and we've done enough learning and enough work to be able to say we know what that can look like. We also can know where we don't know, right? And where we need to be called in and where we need to grow. So is that education, that self-growth, has that been part of your journey for this?
Huge. Huge. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said admitting what you don't know.
That's our biggest advice to people is know what you don't know and then either learn it or delegate it.
And it takes constant, we are constantly finding new books, new articles, new
newsletters.
podcasts.
And I think it's not something that we just do internally. It's an internal, and then it flows right into Sesh, and then it goes right out to our community. I think it's just, I don't know. I always joke that if I wasn't an entrepreneur, I would probably be a student for life, and I would just be in college or university nonstop, getting one degree after another, because I just learning is just ingrained in who I am. And I think learning the experiences of others and being able to hope that I can make a change. I think it's just an innate part.
I think it takes a certain amount of openness to be able to listen to someone sharing an experience and not just shut it down. There's so many folks who do that over small things. Even if you feel like what they're saying doesn't make sense to you, having that openness to say, I'm going to be open to what they're talking about. Even if it goes against your values, your beliefs, I'm going to be open. I'm going to listen. That's how, that's truly how you open up your experiences to other people's experiences and other people's perspectives. You got to listen. You got to be open. I know I talked about listening earlier, but it's the only way. Listening and reading, lots of reading.
Fundamental.
Are there ways that you're doing that with the collective of your community? Like, I know you said the stuff that Maggie, you said what we learn kind of goes in and then is out back into Sesh. Are you doing collective learning opportunities, discussions? I heard you mention in a discussion earlier that sounded like it might have tapped into some of these bigger issues. How are you guys doing that as a collective?
We facilitate a lot of conversations and hold space for those conversations to happen through a lot of our events. The one I mentioned before is called Leaders Who Lunch. And on top of that, we make a point to invite our allies into those conversations, because otherwise you're just preaching to the choir.
Yeah, I think a great example of an event we had several years ago, it was called Female Founders Roundtable. And we invited female speakers from kind of different corporate backgrounds to talk about their experiences in the corporate environment. And then our audience, we asked specifically male allies to come and sit and listen. Because if we are in the same room with the same people all the time talking about our problems, they're not going to leave the room. And we need to share those problems and talk about them with the other people. The men need to hear it, because if they don't hear it, they're not going to know what we're experiencing. And then they're not going to be able to be at the table with you one day and be like, hey, wait, you interrupted her. Can you say that again? And so that's, I think, why holding the space and sharing the stories and inviting the right people to be in the room makes a difference. And I think that that's something we're very intentional about in our events and sharing space.
Well, now I have to know, how did that go with those men? I'm assuming they were asked to just sit silently listening, which obviously can be a challenge in the power structures that exist. So how did that go?
Yeah. So we asked them to listen, but then at the end, there was opportunity to ask questions, because they don't have to be silent, right, to understand. And they did ask questions. And it's funny, the men who did show up to that event are still some of our strongest allies and cheerleaders in the Houston community.
I love that. Time to have another one of those, since it's been a while. That sounds amazing. All right, let's talk about your business. I wanted to start with sort of front loading this with all of the things that you're doing that I think can inspire the people who are listening to this, who are running businesses, to start thinking about space, about the work environment that they're creating. We've talked a lot about other issues around finance and, the way you're viewing your money and the way you view visibility. But I think it's really important to think about, as a leader in a business, even if you only have a team of one or two, or if you have a large team, but what's the environment you're creating, that culture you're creating. So I really wanted to start there, but now I really want to hear a little more about Sesh as a business on the back end of it, sort of your experiences with running a business as two women. And I know that actually, Meredith, you started this journey kind of on your own and then brought Maggie in, or Maggie asked to be brought in as a partner with you. What appealed to you? First, I want to hear from Meredith, since you were starting this. What appealed to you about bringing someone on? And then Maggie, what do you love about working in partnership?
I guess I should start by saying that you don't bring Maggie on. No one brings Maggie anywhere. Maggie shows up. So I knew that Maggie mentioned earlier, knowing what you don't know. I knew that I knew I had this vision and I had this drive and this ambition, but I was starting to see all the blind spots, kind of recognize the blind spots. And I knew just in my gut that I did not want to do this alone. And so when Maggie and I went to lunch that one day where she was like, "Hey, I want to help you. I want to be your business partner." It was like the clouds opened up, the angels sang. And I told her, I was like, "Oh my God, I literally was running late to this meeting because I spent 45 minutes crying on my couch before coming because I was so stressed and so overwhelmed and so unsure if I was making the right decisions for me and for my family and for Sesh." And so when she said that, I just had this feeling like, I got to do this. This is what I wanted. I wanted someone to walk beside me and do this together and collaboratively. And I mean, if you Google, like, should I bring on a business partner? The articles are so harsh. They're like, no.
They're super negative. Yeah.
Very negative. And I was like, this is not, my body isn't telling me any of that. My body's telling me, breathe. This is what you're meant to do. This is how Sesh is meant to grow. And so being open to her willingness to come on board was one of the best decisions that I could have ever made, because there's no way this business would be what it is without the two of us and our personalities and our skill sets. Yeah. So it's been the best decision that I've ever made. We got business married.
We did.
We always say that. We got business married.
And what do you like about being in that marriage, Maggie?
I had started several other businesses prior to Sesh, and one of them being a chamber of commerce. And it took so much heavy lifting because I was doing it simultaneously while running my jewelry business. And it got to the point when I was doing both of them that I would have to set a timer for when I was working on chamber of commerce stuff, so I wouldn't use up too much of my time. So I had enough time to like actually work on my paying clients. In doing that and feeling like the physical ramifications of how much stress I was under, I realized, like, okay, if there is a next thing that I'm going to do, I don't want to do it by myself, because it can be really lonely to have those feelings and then to not be able to share those feelings with someone. And it can also just, you burn out so much faster. And I can tell you, I mean, at the end of this year, I think we'll have been business partners for 5 years, which is crazy. It feels like way longer than that. But in the moments where I feel burned out, for whatever reason, she's not there. She's not at the burnt out level. She's on the higher end of energy, right? And then vice versa. The moments where she's feeling weighed down, I'm like, we can do it. And so just being able to kind of like be the yin and the yang to each other's energies and know, like, okay, Maggie's feeling really high right now. Meredith's not. Okay, well, the tables are going to turn eventually.
When I talked to all the way back on episode 1, whenever this airs, but episode 1 with Sive Harquell, who's a feminist economist, and she talked about, for something to be feminist, it needs to be transformational, it needs to be intersectional, and it needs to be collective. And what I'm hearing inside that is this collective piece and how important that is. And I love that you mentioned, Meredith, all the articles that are out there and they're so negative. And ultimately you listen to your body, to your knowing, to your intuition, which again is sort of pulling from that feminine energy, that divine feminine energy, however you want to experience that or talk about that. And that is that difference, isn't it, between so much of the traditional business advice and what I think it can look like to talk about feminist business, which is about like collective experiences. It's about intuition. It's about trusting yourself and your body. And so I love that that's what guided you. And it sounds like you have no regrets from what I can tell. But are there challenges in working together?
Well, one thing, you have to share everything with each other. Like there's like full on transparency, like how much money you both make. You got to share your tax returns. Like,
what kind of debt you might be under.
Yeah.
You got a criminal record? We better talk about this.
Are there things in your past that could come up if you guys blow up, or like even just very simply sharing your calendars. Because like, sure, if you're an individual business owner and you want to go on vacation, you can go on vacation whenever you want because it's all on you, right? But when you have a business partner and they have a family and it's going to impact their childcare situation and then it's going to impact your team, you kind of got to like talk to one another and figure it out. And is this the best time or should I wait? So it's a lot of communication.
A lot of communication, yeah.
Like almost over communication.
Yeah. I like our level of communication. I don't think it's over. Drew would think it was over.
Well,
my husband would think.
But that's what I'm saying.
You talk to Maggie all the time. Like, yes, we're attached to the hip. We have to be.
We probably see each other more than we see
our husbands sometimes.
Yeah.
I think
that's why I was saying over communication.
Yeah.
Some people would be like, I don't want to share that much.
Yeah, it's true. I think too, one of the best things about Mags and I is that we are opposites in a lot of ways. Our skill sets and some parts of our personalities are opposite of one another. And I think that I was actually thinking about this on the drive up today. I think that's one of the best things you can do in business because it really we round out the business nicely. But that doesn't mean that there's not disagreements and there's not sometimes tension on decision making. And we both come at it from different perspectives. And I think that's good because it reminds me of the checks and balances, the idea of checks and balances, like I would, being the person who does a lot of the consumer facing sales side, I would give away the world.
We always joke that we should have like 2 Giphies on Instagram where Meredith is like the yes. She's like, yeah. And Maggie's like, no. Like just our heads.
Maggie being the CFO, she looks at the numbers and she looks at the accounting side that I don't see. I just see the sales. Like, I'll do what it takes to get the sale. And she's like, yeah. You're not going to give away our business though. That doesn't solve anything. So, but we need that because it just wouldn't, like I said, it wouldn't be Sesh without the both of us. So there's a lot, we got to talk through things a lot. And you also have to know when it's time to compromise and when I can be a stubborn mule. And I've had to learn, like, okay, are you putting your foot down because you really believe this is best? Or are you just putting your foot down, put your foot down? Like, just let it go. Just let it go. It's not worth it.
You mentioned finances. So Maggie, our CFO, I wanted to talk to you too about funding, because from what I understand, I believe, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but what I think I heard was that you started this with your own capital versus going through some traditional sort of funding routes, either loans or VC funding or whatever else that might look like. So what was involved in that decision? Why did you decide to go that private funding route? And what were the challenges of that?
We really didn't have a choice, to be honest. Traditional lending from banks, they like you to be in business for 3 years so they can see, your tax returns, see your growth, see your revenue. And when you're a brand new business, you that doesn't exist, right? And then the other thing was because co-working is, I'm going to use air quotes here, a new business, even though it's technically been around for about 30 years, thanks to Regis and IWG, our NAICS code with the federal government puts us in a real estate category. So we cannot get funding from the SBA. I have tried. I've gone rounds with them on multiple occasions. And even said to, like, I've gone all the way up the hierarchy in the local SBA here in Houston. And I've gone, we're like a hotel. We rent rooms for a specific amount of time. We're like a hair salon. We a salon rents a chair to a stylist. We're like a gym where people have memberships, like a country club. They give all of those people funding. They will not give co-working funding because they believe us to be real estate,
Commercial real estate.
yeah, for whatever reason. So we didn't have that as an option. And then the other thing in terms of like VC funding, again, our epic timing, we started in the shadow of WeWork. And we started looking for spaces just as Adam Newman was kind of crashing and burning with WeWork in a very, very public manner. So our ability to tell a story that was different when it was in the headlines every day was very difficult. And then to have that same thing happen to The Riveter, which was female focused, The Wing, which was female focused, both of which also received extensive, like over $100 million in VC funding, it didn't become an option for us. So it was our own money that we kind of had to use.
Well, this really speaks even more so than I might have expected, but definitely in ways that I did expect, to problems with inclusivity and co-working. Because what I'm hearing inside of all of that ultimately is the people who are getting the money, or the people who are able to start co-working spaces, are the people who have the money, people who have that privilege already, or are part of some sort of corporate arm that have that money. And we know that typically that means it's going to often be white people, often mostly be men, white men primarily, and then in your case, white women who had that privilege to be able to have that funding, which I'm sure was not easy, but to even be able to have that involves so much privilege. And what that does to co-working. And so the fact that you are creating an inclusive co-working space feels even more important, because my guess is that co-working spaces have historically not been very inclusive for those reasons. So you opened up in February of 2020. What timing that is. And I know right before that, actually, before we get to that, you looked at an initial space. And the story that you told Maggie about that in another podcast that I heard, that you were working with basically a real estate person, a landlord or someone, and telling them you're going to want to open this co-working space. It was a really big 20,000 square foot space or something. And then basically, from what I can tell, they kind of stole your idea. They were like, well, we're going to open a co-working space. You can have a piece of this. And you guys had the audacity to say no. And I love the word audacity, and it's coming up in multiple of these episodes of people who are audacious enough to think that they get to do something, right? Like, I can do this thing that historically has been excluded, or to say no in the face of like, where else will we go? What will we do? So tell me a little bit about the experience of that, having someone do that to you, and then what gave you guys that wherewithal to say, no, we're not going to just accept this little bit and change what we're doing.
For us, we had spent several months talking to this person, like 5 or 6. And it was basically to the point of like, okay, there needs to be a lease on the table at this next meeting. And that person came to the meeting with, well, I'm going to do my own co-working space on the first floor. Y'all can have the second and third floor. And I'm going to bring in these partners from this other co-working space, and they're going to do that with me. And we were like, can we get back to you?
And that came because I'm tell me if I'm misremembering, but that came because he wanted us to take the whole building, and we were like, we feel a little more confident taking 2 and 3 or whatever it was at that time.
Because we really wanted retail on the first floor. We wanted like a coffee shop or a bar or something on the first floor, and then to have co-working.
Right. And we were willing to help him. Like, we will introduce you to community partners,
Yeah, we'll help you fill the first floor.
Yeah. And that just wasn't what he wanted. And I guess he wasn't willing to trust us and trust our judgment on what we knew was right for our business. But man, I'll never forget the call when we were on, you and me, Mags, when I remember you said at first, you were like, we got to pull the plug. We can't do this. And I remember we loved The building.
Like, it was like,
so
it fit our vision perfectly. Like, it was just like, we wouldn't have had to do any construction. We just had to get furniture. Like, it was just,
The location was great.
chef's kiss, you know?
There was parking.
Yeah.
Parking in Houston. I mean, like,
It was just,
But I remember feeling so down. I think we spent at least a week just sort of not stewing in it, but feeling it. Because it was like, well, what do we do now? We've invested
so much time.
6 months into this. What do we do now? I think it was you that got me back on the horse, because you were like, let's go look somewhere. There's something else out there.
Well, yeah. And I would like to finish the end of that story and say what it lit a fire under me, and it really pissed me off, because here was another man stealing our idea and thinking that he could do it better than us. And I was like, bucko, stay in your lane. You're a real estate developer. We're co-working. And so he happened to name drop the people that he was going to partner with. And lo and behold, that person DM'd me on LinkedIn, and we had a meeting with them, and we told them what the landlord had told us. And they were like, we never said that. We're not doing that. And they showed up with us to the next meeting and sat on our side of the table.
That had to feel good.
And you know what feels good too? That building still sits empty. So we knew we made the right decision. And to your point, we did sit and stew in it, and it made us make a decision that, okay, that took too long. We felt a little uncomfortable in the size. So let's just go for small, prove our concept. We'll get like a 2 or 3 year lease, and we'll that's just like, those are the types of spaces we're going to start looking at. Like, forget the 20,000 square feet, right? And thank God we did, because COVID happened.
I was going to say, you ended up in a space that was basically 1/10 of the size, right? You're about 2,000 versus 20,000, and did that right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I would imagine if you hadn't, you might not be here today, because I can't imagine the price difference in what you would have been talking about, because you then went months with no revenue, months of having to sit with empty spaces, right? How did you weather those storms from February through June, when you were able to reopen, and then even the months after that of waiting for people to actually show up and use the space? How did you guys weather that financially and the stress of that?
So we reopened because we needed it, right?
We needed it, and we basically had two options, right? Stay closed, make no money, bleed out all of our capital that we had, and die. Like, gone. Or reopen,
Give it a shot.
see what happens. And that's what we did. And it was month by month. I mean, it was like by the skin. If we can just get 3 more members, if we can just get to October. I mean, we tried everything. It's like everything.
So if there's anything you can pick up from our conversations, Maggie and I are not two individuals who like to sit idly by. We don't like to watch things happen. We like to make things happen, for better or worse. But when we reopened in June, we were like, look, what can we do? Even if we go under, we know we got this space for, X amount of months. I think October was our date for a really long time. We were like, if we can make it to October, maybe we'll survive. But that's when things run out. And so at that time, that was also when we were really thinking hard about what kind of space we wanted to be. And we really started to focus on, no, we are an inclusive space for everybody. So we opened up our doors to nonprofits. And we said, look, you don't have to pay us anything. You can come in and use the space. And at that time, we were really focusing on nonprofits who were fighting for social justice. And so they did. They came in,
We had
they used
two.
the space, and it was glorious just to have people there. I mean, we were all masked up. We were all, furniture spread to the outskirts of the walls, and giving proper space.
Air purifiers running,
Yeah.
hand sanitizer, Lysol, like
we did it all. We cleaned. Oh my God. Remember how much we cleaned? We didn't have money to pay a cleaner.
Every time someone sat down and used a space and then they would get up and leave, we would disinfect.
We were practically following people with Lysol. I can't believe that they didn't
find us annoying.
Yeah. But I think at that time, Maggie talked before about us balancing each other's burnout. There were two very specific conversations about a month apart that we had. One of them where we each questioned, can we do this? Should we keep doing this? I don't have the answer. And at that time, thank God, the other one was there to be like, look, I don't know. I don't have those answers either, but I feel like I got this much more energy. So what if we just try until this date and reevaluate? And that's what it kept being. It was, okay, 3 more members, or okay, we just need $1,000 more to break even. Okay, well, what if we tried this? What if we tried that?
A flash sale,
I mean, we tried it all. We pitched every idea. If someone told us we could have turned if we turned our space into a children's playground, we would have made money. We would have pivoted our whole business and been like, we'll figure out what Sesh is later. We're a children's playground today. I mean, we would have sold hamburgers if we thought that would have kept us afloat. We tried it all, and I'm glad we did.
You eventually actually outgrew that space. How long did that take?
We were talking about October. That would have been October of 2020. And then by May of 2021, we were outgrowing our existing space. So we started looking for new spaces. Circled back around to a landlord who had been very open and liked what we were doing. And we had actually looked at this space and considered it so much so to the point that we had a floor plan kind of drawn out, just a messy sketch, right? And it was still empty. So we struck a deal with him, and come December of 2021, we closed down our previous location and spent the entire holiday season, the last 2 weeks of December, basically moving and doing construction in the new location. We both got COVID, and then we reopened in January. So we've been in this space since January of 2022.
And the way we designed this space and set it up, we did it so that this would act as our headquarters now. It was set up for growth.
Is there any part of you in March of 2020, when you were sitting in your empty offices thinking, we don't know if we can even do this, is there any part of you that could have imagined where you are now in a place that, again, you're back to that 20,000 square foot sort of space, right? That you had originally thought about being in. So you're at 10 times the space you were in a few years ago. Is there any part of you that thought that this could happen? I mean, and maybe the answer is yes. Maybe you guys were able to hold that belief.
Looking back, my immediate answer is no. I would have never thought I was here. But that's not true. Because if there wasn't some part of me that kept visualizing it and dreaming it, if there wasn't that belief, there's no way we would have gotten here. Because if without belief, you've got nothing. You've got no path. You've got no drive. And so, yeah, I think there is this part of me in March of 2020 that sat there that was like, I know we can do this. I know we can. Even if the voice was super, super tiny and small, it was there.
Again, I feel like I hear that intuition piece. And I just think it's so important because for me, that is ultimately what I want this show to be about. At the core of it is most of the business advice that you hear out there is so rooted in all of this traditional, patriarchal, capitalist, racist ideology. And it can feel very lonely in those moments when you are alone in the space and you don't have customers and you think, what am I doing? Or trying to create this inclusive space in a world around you that's telling you that that's horrible, or whatever the thing is that you're trying to do differently. It is so easy to say, they're right. They know better than I know. And I hear again and again from you, especially Meredith, I think you're very in touch with that intuitive piece, but both of you, I hear this like, no, we know what's right for ourselves.
There's definitely a balance. I don't think Maggie can use intuition when she's balancing the numbers at the end of the month. But you got to listen to yourself.
Yeah, I don't know if intuitive bookkeeping is maybe the best approach, but I want to ask about self-care, because also throughout this journey, there's been a lot of ups and downs, a lot of challenges. We're going to talk in a minute about some of the laws that are happening in Texas and how that's potentially affecting you. And just all of these things that you've been through can really weigh heavily on you and maybe also on your community as a whole. How do you approach self-care as founders? And then if it's applicable, how are you approaching that with your community?
I think the one thing I learned when I was a solopreneur was I have to take care of myself. Otherwise, the machine doesn't keep going, So I learned, I think, pre-sesh, okay, Maggie needs her workouts. Maggie needs a full night's sleep. I need time away. I need time with my family. And so I feel like coming with that and having that ingrained in me, because I hit a wall and it had physical ramifications, right? And I think I shared that with Meredith, and I think along the way you've learned that and picked up on it. And
yeah, you really threw me for a loop when she was sitting there. I was like, what are you working on? She's like, I'm writing my workouts out for the next 6 weeks. I was like, my God, I'm not that organized. She got me organized.
But I think in doing that, it's part of that, like acknowledging that people are multifaceted, right? And whole humans, and that like, okay, well, if there's things that we're doing that are stressing us out, well, then that's going to apply to not just our community members, but also our team members, right? And the people who are on our team. And if they're going through something, we want to make sure that they have the same open communication that she and I have, that they have that with us, so they can come to us and be like, you know what? I have got something going on at home and I just need to take the afternoon off because my head's not here and my heart's not here. And so I think acknowledging that is half the battle, I think.
Yeah. And for me with self-care, I came to after a long journey of waffling back and forth, realizing last year that I really needed to stop drinking alcohol. For me, I relied on it so much to cope with stress. And once I stopped, and I've been able to find my own boundaries again and find my own routine. So I also rely on workouts. Maggie and I take walks almost every afternoon, despite it being 102 outside. We don't care because normalized sweating. It's Houston. We do that. And then also I rely a lot on meditation. But for me, the biggest thing is listening to the balance that I need. I don't have an exact ratio of I need this much session, this much challenge, and this much family time, and this many hugs. I don't know what that number is. I just know what I feel like when I go one way or the other. And I think following that and making sure that I am getting enough hugs from my kids, because that does actually help. But then it also helps when I can be like, okay, go away now. Go play. I want to do grown-up things. Oh, I've also started painting recently, which has been really fun.
Well, speaking of stressors, and I don't want to end on such a stressful note, but the reason that we had scheduled this interview later in my process was because we were waiting to hear about some changes that are coming in Texas that may affect you. And tell me if I'm wrong, but I think I found it was at the end of May that the Texas legislature gave the approval to a bill that will criminalize performers that put on sexually explicit shows in front of children, and then any businesses that host them. They've taken out specifically the words drag, but ultimately the way the the law is written, it still is very clearly targeting drag performances. And I believe this is something that can affect you all because from what I understand from what Maggie had told me, you guys have hosted or want to host drag performances. And obviously, as you said, you have children can be there because they're with their parents as they're working. So what has all this meant for you and where are you guys at this point? How are you showing up around this new law and dealing with your commitment around inclusivity in the most diverse city in the country inside of a state that doesn't really doesn't align with your value system?
It's a lot of talking to people within the community, trying to be organized with our voices, speaking in unison together with other organizations, whether that be, the LGBT Chamber or the LGBT Caucus or whomever. But I also think it means walking a fine line, I think for us, where we get concerned is we have hosted variety shows before, and it's specifically trans folks reading poetry, singing, playing an instrument, and the law is just vague enough that should the right person want to make a big deal out of it, our business could be labeled sexually explicit. And while that is a private event held in an event space and is generally not held during our normal business operating hours, to your point, we are kid friendly and children are still in the space periodically, right? It's not that children are there attending those events, but it's that the two things are happening in the same space. So I think we just have to take one day at a time, one event at a time, and see where it goes. I know recently, I believe Tennessee's law was overturned. Mm-hmm. So there is hope, right? That set a precedent. But to your point, we are in Texas, and a lot of the legislation is on the other side, right? And so how do we work with them or make them understand like that's you're blanketing something that doesn't need to be categorized the way you're categorizing it.
And it's really an attack on the gay and lesbian culture as well. This is a huge part of a lot of folks coming out and embracing themselves and their journeys,
self-expression,
and
then a lot of times drag is used as a fundraiser for within the community.
Yes.
So, and it's impacting businesses. For example, there's it's called the Pearl Bar here in Houston. It's one of the oldest lesbian bars in the nation,
and there aren't that many total.
No. And recently they made an Instagram post that they may potentially go out of business because their insurance company revoked their insurance because they occasionally have drag performances and did not want to insure them because of the drag performances. And if you know anything about a bar, they have to have insurance to have a liquor license. And if you don't have a liquor license, then you can't sell alcohol and you don't have any money. So it's going to become a slippery slope if it doesn't get reversed.
Even though you're still very much in it and navigating it and probably don't have all the answers yet. No one does. But I think it's just interesting to bring these things, talk about them, how these laws affect businesses too, right? And affect how you begin to think about walking your values and what does that look like? And this can be really complicated. And I don't think it's going to get easier anytime soon. And there are all sorts of laws, not just this one and ones like this, but there are so many things that are happening across the country that there's a lot of people I think who will be listening who are running businesses and often like myself are in a state that as a whole, the laws don't reflect my value system, and you're having that too. And then how do you navigate within that? Because the answer isn't always just pack up and leave. That's not the answer. You want to serve Houston, you want to serve the people in that city. And it is, again, a very diverse city. And so, yeah, these are the challenges of like, what does it look like to walk your talk?
Yeah, and I think that that's the important part of, making sure that we're active in our own community, right?
Mhm.
Like, because if we don't have the relationships with the people who have the relationships with the lobbyists, then we can't use our voices and our business and our community to kind of like help. And I think for us, some of these laws, hopefully they don't pass, like total ban on healthcare for trans folks. That will directly impact our team, and make it really hard for Dean to receive the healthcare that he needs. So it's serious.
Well, thank you for speaking to it in the moment and knowing that, there are no perfect answers yet, but that these are things that people are navigating, and that for anyone else who is, you're not alone. Lots of people are stuck in the trenches of this and trying to figure out what does it look like. So, all right, let's finish up by sharing resources, because I'm a huge fan. When I listen to podcasts, I love to learn about either new podcasts I could go listen to, or a book I can go read, or someone I can follow on, TikTok or wherever.
This book I read maybe 2 years ago. It's by Priya Parker, called The Art of Gathering. And she talks about creating boundaries within your, event and or space, creating intention, and kind of giving people jobs within the event, so they have ownership, and then kind of giving people rules for the event. Okay, this is our goal for this event. Here's what we're doing, whether that's a bar mitzvah or a birthday or a networking event. And it's been a book, and I think she had a podcast for a hot minute, and a newsletter that I think we constantly go back to and reread and use as a resource, just to kind of help us and guide us with our gatherings.
Yeah. So I'll go a little away from the business side and go more to the to my own personal journey. So there is this book, and I don't remember the two authors' names, so you'll have to forgive me. Maybe you can find it and put it in the notes. But the book is called The Sober Lush, and it was written by two women out of Austin who were on their own drinking and then their sobriety journey. The reason why I love it, and the reason why I feel like it is feminist, I'm sure they have some specific things in there which would speak to the very fundamental values of feminism. But what I see as inherently feminist is this idea that women should seek joy and pleasure. And so many times in society, we are taught that no, we're supposed to be martyrs. We're supposed to give it all. We're not supposed to like feel that happiness and seek that happiness. And for me, reading that book was so enlightening, because the reason they wrote the book is saying like, hey, you can still have this lush, full, beautiful, luxurious life if you choose not to drink. And here are all the ways you can do it. But I just read that book and thought, oh my God, look at all these moments of joy you can build into your day and you can experience. And some of them were big and some of them were really, really small, like bringing out the fancy china for a dinner with the family just because. And I love that. And ever since I read that book, like probably a long time ago, like a couple of years ago, way before I even decided that I was going to be on my own sobriety journey, I thought, wow, yeah, that's true independence right there, is taking a hold of your joy and not feeling guilty for experiencing it and really leaning in.
It's by Amanda Iyer Ward and Jardine LeBaire. Just looked it up. And I'm a huge fan. I love talking about pleasure. And I would just throw in Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. But it's a similar, like, not around alcohol, though, so I know that's a different journey. But yes, pleasure is liberation. And I love that. All right. Finally, an organization that you all support that we can highlight to bring attention to.
So I'm the board chair for Magpies and Peacocks, which is the nation's only nonprofit fashion house. They upcycle all sorts of material into one-of-a-kind pieces. My favorite one that they're working on right now is they received 3 planes worth of blue leather from JetBlue that they are going to be working into their next runway show. And I can't wait to see what they come up with.
Because feminism needs to include the most important woman in all of our lives, which is Mother Earth. So I love that. And I've never heard of them, so I'm going to check it out. And Meredith?
I was going to at least be like, well, I might mention the Greater Houston LGBT Chamber of Commerce because we love them. We work so closely with them. They do so much for the LGBT and ally community. But then there's also the Houston chapter of the League of Women Voters offices here with us in Houston. And they are doing so much good by informing voters so that they can get to the polls and make the right decisions for them. But the one I'm going to land on is another one of our members called Birthday Bash Box. It is run by Shantae Johnson. She started this organization in order to provide a day of joy for kiddos on their birthdays, kiddos who might be living in a scenario where they're not able to celebrate the way that another child might be able to. And the reason I want to highlight Shantae is because we started sponsoring space for them way back over a year ago. And we have just watched her commit so much time.
She has a full-time job.
She has another full-time job. And she does so much. We've watched it grow. She needs more space now. And we want her to thrive.
I will be making a donation to both of them. I will go with the final 2 that you chose. But I will link to all 4 that you gave me. Encourage people who got something from this episode to go and show their thanks as well by making donations to these awesome organizations doing great work. Because I think that's the way that we, again, make that collective change, is that we all use our privilege where we have it, where we have privilege, if it's financial, to be able to redistribute some of that wealth into these organizations that are making a difference. So thank you so much for sharing those, for telling us about your story. I'm also going to link the resources that you mentioned in the show notes for anybody who wants to check out those books. And I just really thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Feminist Founders Podcast. If you like what you heard and want to learn more, or if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing with the show, please visit feministfounderspodcast.com. There you can find out about becoming a paid subscriber for as little as the price of 1 cup of coffee a month, which will directly support my work. You can also find the show notes and find the bookshop.org website where you can order any of the books mentioned in this or any episode, which will also support the work I'm doing. The link to all of that is in the show notes. Thanks again, and I can't wait for our next episode.